Thanks for listening to the Duval Rundown, brought to you by Injury Care Centers. Your path to recovery starts here. Now here's your host, Gus Logue.
Good morning. Welcome to episode 45 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined, as I am on every Thursday, by Mia O'Brien. We're going to break down Jaguars versus Raiders today, and more specifically, three players that we're going to be keeping our eyes on because that's kind of the point of our season. But first, as we do at every show, we're going to start with some Jaguars trivia. The Jaguars will visit Allegiant Stadium for the first time on Sunday. The most recent meeting between these teams was a 27-20 Jaguars win in Jacksonville in 2022. Which Jaguars player scored twice in that game? Try to keep it pretty simple. Was it Travis Etienne, Evan Engram, Christian Kirk, or Zay Jones? Who scored 2 touchdowns the last time the Jags played the Raiders? Do you remember, Mia?
I do. So I'm going to also give the disclaimer and the behind the curtain insight. I was in the Jaguars locker room yesterday, and straight up, I made a comment to Ross Matisick of, "You've never faced the Raiders, right?" And he looked at me. He's like, "Weren't you here in 22? You were at the game. I'm pretty sure you talked to me after." And I was like, "Oh, that's right. Devontae Adams." Tyson trailed him for the first time he ever actually followed a wide receiver one, because we finally got past that mental block of Mike Caldwell. Came back from a double-digit halftime deficit to take back that game and their third win of the season. It would be Travis Etienne. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gus.
That is correct. It's actually the first multi-touchdown game of his career. Was that? I think it was week 10. It was about halfway through the 2020.
It was right after London. That was the first time, because Doug Peterson has insisted, like, hey, we can go to London and come back and play the very next weekend in the continental U.S. We don't need our bye because we'd rather wait a few weeks. And so it was the first week in November, because fun facts, that was the day I met my boyfriend Kevin, was during the tailgate pregame after I hosted the Terminex kickoff show, because he was in town with some friends, as he reminded me last night. And my parents were also here, which is why I always told people that he met my parents very early on. And so, because I didn't even know him either when they met him, because they met about 25 people that day at the slab. And so, we can't forget the day that Travis Etienne had his first multi-touchdown game in our household.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier when you're going against Derek Carr, but this one should be fairly easy because Derek Carr obviously no longer in Vegas. Gardner Minshew was signed to be their starter, but he's now on season-ending injured reserve, with I believe a collarbone injury. So now they're down to Aiden O'Connell if he's healthy enough, or maybe Desmond Ridder. But yeah, we're not really going to focus too much on the Raiders today. It should be a winnable game. We will get to some score predictions. But Mia, who's the number one player that you're going to be watching for today who's not named Brian Thomas Jr.? Because we
have to let the folks know. Gus Logue, let's start with this. Gus Logue prepares for today's show. By the way, as I just tweeted out, this is our last daily show until after Christmas. We will be back. Of course, we will have Sunday shows. Don't worry, folks. We're going to be around for you so you can commiserate after a victory over the Raiders, a victory over the Titans. We will be here for you guys. But no Tuesday show next week on Christmas Eve, no Thursday show. And then the following Tuesday, Gus will be back. Most likely with Hayes Carline, and then I'll be back on Thursday. So just for programming purposes. With that said, poor Gus, it's his last Duval Rundown daily of the week before the Christmas holiday. He comes here loaded with Brian Thomas Jr. stats. He has been gracing your internet and your timeline with it all week long. And I sit down and I go, all right, Gus, we have to set a rule. You can't pick BTJ as one of the 3 players to watch, because he's everyone's player to watch. And not just here in Duval County, but I think across the National Football League, he's in the top 5. And that is on a team that has mathematically been eliminated from the postseason.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether he was going to be on your list, because since we both came prepared with 3 players, but I couldn't, even if we have talked about him all week, whether it's on this show, our radio station, our city in general, like, can't stop talking about number 7. But I think it's deserved. And yeah, I was coming in here prepared to have Brian Thomas as my number 1 guy to watch.
So empty the tank. Give us the BTJ stats. Remind the people, give them the copium they need.
All right, off the top of my head, he's one of 5 players this season with at least 850 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns scored. He joins Jamar Chase, Mon-Ra St. Brown, I want to say Justin Jefferson, and Terry McLaurin. He also is the first wide receiver since Jamar Chase in 2021 to have at least 5 catches of 40-plus yards. He's currently 9th in just straight up receiving yards among all NFL players. And so this guy is incredible. And like the thing that gets me so excited is that like the numbers and the production are great, but I feel like he's mostly been getting it because of his athleticism. Like he's clearly the kind of guy that like has just his entire life, regardless of the sport, he's been able to just like beat the guy across from him largely because of athleticism. And so like that's just so exciting to me because I think that he's, as I said on the Tuesday show, I don't think his fundamentals and technique and stuff like that are bad or negatives at all. But if he can really hone in on those things and do like what Justin Jefferson and countless other superstars have done, which is like take your freak athleticism, but really like hone in on your craft to take it to the next level. I think Josh Hines Allen is actually a really good example of someone who's done that. Came into the league, was immediately an awesome athlete, and he had 10.5 sacks his rookie year, but he continued to work at his craft. And so for Brian Thomas, it's just super it's kind of like Trevor, honestly, where you can get a little bit carried away with just thinking about like what the player could be, because like the potential is just limitless. And so it's especially exciting because now those two players are going to be playing together for hopefully the next decade plus. But yeah, like Brian Thomas, I was one of the majority of people, I think, who wrongfully assumed that he was just like a big burner, like almost like a DK, like a skinnier DK Metcalf, where he's like a size freak, take the top of the defense off for you. And that's kind of his main thing. Obviously, DK can do more than that, but so can Brian Thomas. He's just an everything player. As Doug Peterson described this week, he's the workhorse of the offense. It's become his show. And again, it's all rightfully so. It's hard to wrap your head around it, like how good this kid already is and how good he could be. And so, yeah, very, very excited to continue watching Brian Thomas.
But you can't pick him. So in the snake draft, because I know you came ready with BT, we'll make it a snake draft, Gus. You get to go first. Who is in the last 3 games of the 2024 season, mercifully, the last 3 games, who are the 3 players not named BTJ that you are going to have your eye on?
So the number 1 non-Brian Thomas player for me is Trey Prince, the 5th-round rookie out of Ole Miss, because Doug Peterson specifically brought him up. Pretty sure you were the one who actually asked him this question, Mia, about just certain players who are going to get more playing time, but specifically in the secondary starting this weekend. He said that he would like to see more Trey Prince because he's been one of the guys that hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities. Like he wants to see more of Monteric Brown and Antonio Johnson too, but those guys have already played a decent amount of snaps and games this year. But Trey Prince has really only played like during blowouts against the Bills and the Bears, and I think he also played a little bit in the Packers game. So like he really hasn't played a lot, and it's been a little bit up and down for him. But like I feel like it's a little bit hard to really judge his tape when it's such a small sample size. You're not really getting to see a lot, and so I am excited to see a lot more because I think that Doug is like the way that he put it is fair. Like we just haven't seen a lot of this specific player, and we want to see more of him, especially since he's a rookie and a 5th rounder. And more than everything else, or on top of everything else, like cornerback is going to be a position of need for Jacksonville entering the offseason. And so I think like Monteric Brown certainly deserves a shout out on his own, and he could be a whole another player of interest. But like, so those 2 guys really, I'll be interested to watch both this week and through the rest of the season to see if maybe whoever the Jaguars' defensive coordinator or coaches next year says in the offseason, okay, I like the tape that this guy showed in the last month of football in 2024. I think that we could actually have a secondary with him as a key piece in it, even if he's not a Tyson Campbell, where he can shut down a Devontae Adams type for a half. Like it's important to build a bunch of role players in that unit. I feel like it's kind of similar to how some people talk about wide receiver, where you're building it like a basketball team and you want a bunch of different kind of shapes and sizes and different roles throughout that unit. It's kind of the same in the secondary. And so having a number 1 guy already in Tyson makes your life a lot easier in terms of building the rest of that secondary. But I am interested to see in how the rest of the secondary does get built behind Tyson. And I think that is a great opportunity for both DeAndre Prince and Monteric Brown to kind of get themselves a spot on the team, but also a significant spot in the secondary next year and going forward.
Yeah, I think both those players, at least at this juncture, would be the reserves. I do think you ultimately have to go out, whether it's in free agency or the draft. My personal preference would be the draft, and you have to go get another corner opposite Tyson Campbell. Now, with that said, Trey Prince, a lot of rave reviews coming out of Ole Miss through the pre-draft process because he was renowned, Gus, as one of the better pure man corners because of his 4.3 speed on the outside. What's interesting, too, is that he's been active for all but one game. He's gotten a jersey, which I'm sure there's some other names we're going to get to on this list who you can't say the same for. And so he's been available, and yet they haven't put him in on the outside despite the hockey shifts of Ryan Nielsen's defense. For the first time this past weekend, how many snaps did we see the veteran Ronald Darby play on defense, Gus?
Darby got 0 snaps.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. But here's the thing. That was all in favor of Buster Monteric Brown. And so that's important too, because I think Buster is truly quality depth. He is, if like last year, if Tyson Campbell has to go on IR for 3 or 4 games, or for 4 or 5 games, excuse me, that's the guy who you say, you know what, he has the experience. We can throw him in a pinch. But do you want him to be your starter? Because if you do, I think you walk into a similar situation, and this is with no disrespect to Buster, who I think is one of the best value picks of Trent Baalke's tenure, getting him in the 7th round after he led the SEC in interceptions his final season at Arkansas. But ultimately, I just think that this would be the same move as elevating Trey Herndon, once an undrafted free agent, after Jalen Ramsey was traded, and saying, you're going to be opposite A.J. Boye. Now, A.J. Boye was also aging, and Tyson Campbell is entering his prime, so there's a difference there to be had as well. A.J. Boye was then shipped away, jettisoned after the 2019 season, and so all of a sudden, Trey Herndon is your corner number 1, if only on a roster that was basically an expansion team, that 1-in-15 squad in 2020. And I don't want to see the Jaguars end up in a similar situation in an offense in the National Football, excuse me, in an age in the National Football League in which offenses are so predicated on the pass.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a fair point for you to say, like, there'll probably be reserves and they definitely need to address the position. Even if, like, whoever's making the decisions feels comfortable with one of them as a starter, you still need to address the position. I was just saying that Tyson makes it so much easier because, like, he's such a big body and can, especially, I think he can cover pretty much anyone, but especially bigger and more physical receivers. And since Trey Prince and Monteric Brown are both, like, pretty skinny and a little bit undersized, like, you can just get away with that a little bit more by having Tyson on your team. So that definitely helps. But who's your number 1 player that you're looking forward to watching, Mia?
I'm going to go with actually a 4th-year player, Gus. I am going to go with left tackle Walker Little, who, since he took over the starting role after Cam Robinson was traded to the Minnesota Vikings, he has been, if only by PFF metrics, the highest graded Jacksonville Jaguars offensive lineman. I also think it's important to note that the Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line, again, if only through the PFF metrics lens, has not been nearly as much of the problem as I think some people want it to be. Now, yes, in the run game, there's certainly there's some regression there. The Jaguars have not had a 20-plus yard run since week 5. If you look across the board when it comes to run blocking grades, Walker Little is the highest graded run blocker of those 5 starting offensive linemen, and he is ranked 32nd out of 80 offensive tackles, which is a solid mark for him. But at the same time, that suggests that he is just fringe first team, so to speak, when it comes to the PFF grade in run blocking. Anton Harrison is, I believe, 60th out of 80 eligible offensive tackles in run blocking grades. And so that's where that will have to be addressed. But nonetheless, Walker Little, a 71.2 run blocking grade over the last few weeks. It is his highest graded across the board PFF numbers he's seen in his 4-year career. His 97.5 pass blocking grade is also, it's actually, I believe it's 3rd on the team because Brandon Scherf is 7th in pass blocking among eligible guards, but Walker Little 19th among the 80-plus eligible offensive tackles with a 97.5 grade. Cam Robinson, for those of you who are wondering, is ranked 67th. So 19th, 67th. It actually, if you look at the grades are only like 3 points apart. So it's kind of splitting hairs and it's kind of a deceiving stat. But nonetheless, print the shirts. Walker Little's ranked 19th at something. Cam Robinson, 67th. Trent Baalke won the trade. For me, I think it's really important to see Walker continue to progress the way that he has. If you look game by game on PFF, I think that, yes, there was a quote unquote step back after the bye, after he had a 73.3 overall grade against the Minnesota Vikings, 77.9 against the Lions, came back down to earth a little bit against the Texans and the Titans, although still graded out as one of the highest graded Jaguars, and then a 74 grade, his third highest grade of the season. Ultimately, though, for me, Gus, it's that 72 career. It's the 72 mark that he point grade, ironically, because that's the jersey number he wears. The 72 grade between pass blocking and run blocking that he has this season, which would be a career high. And that is in his first season as undoubtedly the starter for this team. That's what says to me, hey, all the jokes aside about Trent Baalke, this was a signing that I know you and I talked about it. John Shipley, our friend at SI, and I talked about it when everyone else in the press box prior to that Texans game was mortified and panicked that Walker Little was being extended and that meant that Trent Baalke was sticking around. We all looked at each other and said, honestly, it doesn't matter if there's a new GM and he walks through the door tomorrow. He would make the same exact deal because you can't go into an NFL draft and an NFL offseason without addressing that all-important left tackle spot.
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes, like, the draft is honestly going to be so interesting for Jacksonville because I feel like they have quarterback 1, wide receiver 1, both left tackle and right tackle, 2 great defensive ends or edges, and then a cornerback 1 in Tyson Campbell. So you already have, like, a lot of premium positions taken care of, and you're really going to be able to take a luxury pick, whether that's in the form of like Ted McMillan and just making your receiver core amazing, or going with Will Johnson or Travis Hunter and getting a really, really good corner to go with Tyson, or investing in the trenches. There's a lot of different ways they can go, obviously throughout the entire draft, but also in round 1. So it'll be a lot of fun to monitor that throughout the offseason and after free agency in March. But yeah, like we said, as soon as it happened, this is a great deal. And it's definitely good to see that Walker is still continuing to improve. I think that's a fair expectation to have for someone like him, who's, even if he's a 4th-year player, he has not played or gotten a consistent chance to play. And so it's funny that, like, he seems like the stabilizing factor on Jacksonville's offensive line, because you would think that Cam Robinson, who's one of the longest tenured players on the team, would be that stabilizing factor. But then as soon as he was traded to Minnesota, Walker Little got the starting job and signed the extension, I feel like the pass protection, especially for Jacksonville, has been a lot better. And maybe, I don't think it's super obvious, especially because now Mac Jones has been playing the past 5 or so games and
may or may not have walked his way into a couple of coverage sacks last week against the New York Jets.
It out of bounds instead of throwing it out. That
cha-cha slide, coined by Gus Logue. For those of you wondering where I came up with that, that would be Gus Logue on the front row of the press box going, is he doing the cha-cha slide right now?
It actually, watching him Sunday reminded me so much of Gardner Minshew. Just if my first read is open, then you can count on me to deliver it. But if my first read is not open, then it's going to be panic mode, and I might do a cool scramble drill that has a spin move that people are going to be talking about, but then I'm also going to take a bunch of sacks and not win the game.
Before we get to your number 2 of your 3 Jaguars to watch in these final 3 games, Gus, I did tweet it out, and we have gotten a couple of responses. I'm curious if any of these names will be number 2 on your list. Tank Bigsby, Brenton Strange, and Jarian Jones says Sam Teague on X. A.B. Kelly says he can't name 3. And then Rob at Jags Nationwide on X says Antonio Johnson, Tyson Campbell. He says a lot of names. He said 5 names. Rob, we're looking for 3, but Antonio Johnson appears to be his first name. Who is your number 2?
Yeah, my number 2 is Devin Lloyd, actually.
Oh, okay. Here we go. The PFF Wonderkins. Let's do it, Gus.
I think that all those names are certainly fair. All the young guys, even the young guys who are already great, like Tyson, everyone's worth watching for certain reasons. But I'm interested in watching Devin because I think that he's going to have a lot of opportunities against Brock Bowers in this game, which is kind of the one player to watch for the Raiders, I feel like. And I do think that Foye Oluokun is actually going to have more opportunities against him in coverage, especially in man coverage, but there still will be plenty of plays, whether it's man or zone, that Brock Bowers is coming into Devin Lloyd's area. And it's not just Brock Bowers, but I feel like the Raiders offense is basically establish the run and find Brock Bowers. And so that's just it feels like it's going to be a Devin Lloyd kind of game. And so not just for this week, but also last week, I meant to double check this and ran out of time, but I'm 99% sure that he's the one that allowed the broken coverage on the Devontae Adams like wide open pass in the fourth quarter. Because to sum it up again, the Jets ran mesh, and so there was a crosser that someone passed off to Devin Lloyd, but Devin, instead of just following Devontae across the field, he had his eyes on Aaron Rodgers and kind of just like followed him out of the pocket the opposite way. And then Rodgers just made like a backyard football play was just special, honestly, to be able to find and connect with Adams. But technically, like, I don't think he deserves a lot of fault, but technically that broken play was on Devin Lloyd. And so I would like to see him get back to taking it like one play at a time, just do your job, just take everything in front of you. And like it feels like he has like a little bit of the Miles Jack syndrome where he's just trying to do everyone's job for them and trying to make every play. And like it's not necessarily a bad thing, because then you know that like he's trying and he wants to win and he wants to compete. But just settle down a little bit. You got a tough matchup just scheme wise against a great tight end and a decent run game. And so I'd like to see how Devin Lloyd responds this week.
Did you know, and you probably do because I know you're very well in tuned nationally. First and foremost, when all is said and done, Gus, we are going to do our own version of Fix Your Franchise that our friends Trevor Sikkema and Connor Rogers of the PFF Stock Exchange have done for several NFL teams. But in their episode for the Jaguars, they did point out that Devin Lloyd, between both sides of the ball, has the second highest PFF grade of any Jacksonville Jaguar. And listen, with all due respect to the PFF boys, they do some tremendous work. We cite it here. We cite it on the Superstation. I'm not really sure how that continues to happen outside of his run blocking, or his run defense, which has obviously taken a significant step forward. And ultimately, you can make the argument that for a second straight defensive regime, he has been miscast. And I feel like we're in a hamster wheel of, well, we need to get him rushing the passer. He needs to be in run defense. He's a Sam linebacker. Oh, so once again, just like Kayvon Chason, you took a Sam linebacker in the first round. Great job. So it's so hard because I keep waiting for these numbers that nationally people rave about Devin, and Devin's a great person and he's a great leader. But I'm still waiting for hey, this is actually circle peg, circle hole, square peg, square hole. This is the right role for him in the right system.
This is Trent Baalke's issue. I feel like for the most part, he like targets amazing athletes, and like he does look for good character and good production and a lot of other boxes to check too. But I feel like his general talent acquisition strategy is like, I'm going to bring in great athletes, and it's up to the coaches to translate them into great football players. And so like with Trayvon Walker, even if the pick should have been Aiden Hutchinson, like that's still a little bit of a success story for Baalke. Same with Tyson Campbell, where like he bet on like these great athletes and then they turned out to be great football players. And then like there's some people like Devin Lloyd and Snoop Connor. I should not put them in the same sense. Devin doesn't deserve that. But like for Devin, it's tough because like he was certainly an amazing college linebacker, and he was a team captain. And there was like a lot of great things to say about him as a prospect. But at the end of the day, like this was just a kid who could fly from sideline to sideline a lot better than most prospects. And he also just had the grit in the run game that a lot of prospects didn't have. But it's like, so you're just hoping that all these intangibles can come together on the pro practice field. And like, I don't know. I know that Devin Lloyd is an NFL caliber football player, but like I struggle to come up with like what the right fit for him truly is. Whether he should continue to be the Mike middle linebacker and be the guy that's the number one stopper of the run game, and then also running up the seam again in Tampa too, like we saw last week on the Devontae Adams touchdown, which that one wasn't his fault. It was just a perfect play call against the coverage, and Rodgers and Adams are kind of inevitable even at this stage of their career. But yeah, like Lloyd, I don't know. I am encouraged by the PFF grade though, because I think that probably means he's been pretty consistent, which is a big buzzword for us on this show. And I would assume that a lot of bad PFF grades is like not necessarily awful players, but players being inconsistent and having a lot of plays where they have poor grades. So then obviously that factors into their overall grade. And so if Devin has a really high PFF score, then I think that probably means that he's not making too many mistakes. And so maybe I'm harping on him a little bit too hard from the mistake last week. But even still, he's an interesting player to watch on Sunday.
No, he's been the bane of a lot of Jaguar fans' existence. And again, the numbers don't match up with it. I'm very curious to see if a new regime is installed, when a new regime is installed, exactly what comes of Devin Lloyd here in Jacksonville. I'm actually, for my number 2 of the 3 players I'm looking at for the last 3 games of the season, I'm going to go to one of the worst graded players on PFF for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm going to let you guess who this is, Gus. Last season, he graded out at a 73.8. That's in the green. That's like a B plus area for this player. This season, 46.4. And while he certainly has had more snaps this season than last, because he has been a starter at times this season, bit perplexing and perhaps an indictment, as Jaguars Nationwide just pointed out in the YouTube comments, perhaps the defensive staff using the wrong coverage, the wrong scheme, and the wrong play calling for this specific player.
I feel like it's got to be a safety. Is it Antonio Johnson?
It is indeed. Well done, Gus. It's perplexing. And I think the difficult part about this, and what I'm so interested to see over these next 3 weeks, and so this kind of brings in a couple other players too. Antonio Johnson was the number 1 graded safety in the slot his final season of college ball at Texas A&M. He had success last year when he came in as either the third safety, that bigger safety who could crowd the box, or if he was actually playing the true nickel. Now the problem you have is not only did you draft in the 3rd round a true nickel in Jarian Jones, who, well, yes, I think he could play the outside. He told me on the Terminex kickoff show last week, he thinks he could play safety. And honestly, with the athletic profile, perhaps akin to what I've heard many say about Jalen Ramsey in the twilight of his career, that they might move him to safety. That was if he had stayed in LA. Also, the source was Maurice Jones-Drew. We'll get to that at a different time. Point being, I could see Jarian moving around, but let's be real. His bread and butter is in the slot. He is your nickel corner of the future. He has that edge. He has that leadership capability. That spot's filled now. And so that means Antonio Johnson, who you jettisoned Rayshon Jenkins to open up the door for Antonio Johnson to be a starting safety. Okay, so that's the plan. That's either where he is, or he's only coming in certain packages. And then you couple that with you bring in Darnell Savage as a free agent and sign him to a decent sized contract with the expectation that he would be playing in the slot, because he played in the slot the majority of the time in his final season in Green Bay and enjoyed one of his best seasons with the Packers. And he expected to play the slot. And because of the deficiencies in the back end, all of a sudden now he's all the way back at square one, not only playing safety, but he's also having to clean up the mess for the miscues by Johnson and Andre Sisco.
Yeah, like they got 3 slot corners this offseason, or I guess 2 new ones in Jarian and Savage, but it really made no sense because I remember when Darnell got signed, the national reaction and even the local reaction was like, wow, that's kind of a lot of money for Darnell Savage, and probably rightfully so, because he did get a lot of money. But I think there was a lot of people out there that were like, oh, he did play a good amount in the slot last year, and he was really good in that role. And he played more slot at Maryland, and he's better closer to the line of scrimmage because then he can just kind of read and react. And like the farther he gets from the line of scrimmage, then like the more kind of time he has to think and mess up. But if he can just like fly and use his athleticism, then he's a good football player. And so I was really excited to see him in the slot. But then, of course, they get Jarian Jones, who like you can't complain about whatsoever.
He's got a chance to be one of like the top 5 nickels. Like if he continues on this trajectory, and look, he's taken his lumps, but I think he has like that Kenny Moore type trajectory right now that he potentially could be on, which look, that's a win. I know it's the 3rd round. And do you want to take a nickel, in the top 100? He was the 96th overall pick. I am A-okay with that. And that's a starting spot that potentially you could have locked up for the next 4 to 8 years. Like sign me up every single day. It just creates this logjam now.
Yeah, because now at safety, it's like Andre Sisco has been disappointing this year. I think probably a big part of it is going from a lot of 2 high safety shells to 1 high, because I think that like when you're a free safety and 2 high, you're still responsible for half of the field, and that's a lot of area to cover, but it's a complete game changer going to a third of the field and you're the middle fielder. And Andre Sisco has shown like good ability to be in that role, but it just hasn't really worked out as well this year. And so that'll certainly be an interesting offseason decision for them since he's a free agent. But now you've got Darnell and Antonio who are still under contract through next year and beyond. And I feel like their best roles are probably like nickel, maybe strong safety so that they're still close to the line of scrimmage. But like, I feel like Antonio Johnson would be cool as the role that he was in last year, actually, which was an early down nickel player, which is essentially like he was a run defender / blitzer who lined up at nickel on early downs. You see Kyler Gordon, who's been awesome in like that type of role for Chicago, where he's certainly a defensive back, but he's like one of the best blitzers in the league, regardless of position. And I feel like Antonio Johnson, we've seen some really good flashes of him blitzing, so I'd like to see him used in that regard more. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how mostly Antonio and Darnell's roles shape up over the next calendar year.
All right, so you've gotten Trey Prince, Devin Lloyd, who is number 3 of your 3 Jaguars to watch the final 3 weeks.
Yeah, number 3 for me is Brenton Strange, who also, like BTJ, he had a career day on last Sunday against the Jets. He caught, off the top of my head, it was 11 of 12 targets for 73 yards and no scores. And so 73 yards on 12 targets doesn't really sound all that impressive, but I think when you go back and watch the film, he did a good job of being like a reliable check down option and possession receiver for Mac Jones. And I think that's been important because it's like, what are you asking this player to do? If you're asking Brenton Strange to be like a two-way player, as in a blocking tight end and a possession catching tight end, then like, great, he can do that for you. But you shouldn't ask him to run certain Evan Engram routes that are like far downfield. He can like run leak and like certainly like run downfield. He shouldn't never run downfield. It's not like he's such a bad athlete that he should be restricted within 5 yards or anything like that. But Engram is just like a different class. Engram is clearly almost more of a receiver than a tight end. And so it's kind of different utilizations in theory. But I say in theory because what we saw Strange do on Sunday is exactly what we've seen from Evan Engram for really the last 2 years, I think, which is being a possession receiver, a check down option, a guy that's just kind of like in the flats and going against linebackers. And he hasn't really been utilized as a mismatch weapon. There was a little bit of that back in 2022 during the first year of Doug Peterson. But really, like, I think the Jags are paying him for too much right now. And I think, like, he is absolutely one of the best, like, locker room guys and leaders. And, like, I think that is extremely important and shouldn't just be swept away. But, like, to me, like, the NFL is a business. And if whoever's coaching Jacksonville next year says, like, we want our tight end to just like be a possession receiver for the most part, then like you are probably going to cut ties with Evan Engram because like he can do a lot more than being that possession guy. But if you just want a possession guy, then it makes a lot more sense to go with Strange, not just because of the contracts, but because Strange is such a better in-line blocker. And it's a really, really big deal for tight ends in terms of like not giving away your intention with your personnel. Because if you have Brenton Strange on every single play, then the defense doesn't know if it's going to be a pass or a run. But if you're trying out Evan Engram, then the defense can assume that a pass is coming. And even if they're wrong and it's actually a run, then they're not going to be that nervous about it because Evan Engram isn't like he's actually going to pancake anyone in the run game. And so I'm really interested to watch Brenton, mostly just to see how he continues to progress since he did have a career best game last week. And I think he'll continue to be the number 2 target in the offense for his next 3 games, behind only Brian Thomas. But I also think that similar to cornerback and all of the other conversations we've had today, his performance could be a big deal in terms of decisions in the offseason.
I tease that we will do our own version of the Fix Your Franchise series from PFF Stock Exchange at some point in the near future. Those boys did have the Jaguars saying goodbye to Evan Engram and Christian Kirk as cap casualties. Spoiler alert. Will Mia and Gus say the same? That remains to be seen. All right, I'll wrap up today's episode with my third pick of the 3 Jaguars I want to see over these last 3 weeks of the season. Before we get to that, H. Fadiophile on X, his 3, Jarian Jones, Mason Smith, Josh Hines-Allen for sack record purposes. I will also...
I like that.
Yep, I like that. I will also go with Mason Smith, but I will put Jordan Jefferson in the same category. I think what's really fascinating, Gus, is Devon Hamilton has been much maligned this year in his first full season coming off of that significant back injury that he had last year. And our friend Daniel Griffiths put together the great stat of in run stop percentage, Devon Hamilton, 11.8%. That is sixth among defensive tackles. He's a fine nose tackle. It's where is the production otherwise coming from on the interior? Another stat that Daniel put out there, of the 123 DTs with 100 plus pass rush snaps, the Jaguars defensive tackles, so out of 123, the Jaguars defensive tackles rank 101st, 105th, 111th, and 120th in pass rush win percentage. So run stopping, run stuffing nose tackle, you have that in Devon Hamilton. There's no pass rush coming from this interior. And so that is where I need to see Jordan Jefferson and Mason Smith, who, by the way, was tied for the team lead in pressures on Sunday against the Jets with Devon Hamilton with a grand total of 2. I need to see those 2 young players over the next 3 weeks.
No mention of Jeremiah Ledbetter. Wow.
Listen, the backflip was the story of the day in the locker room on Wednesday. But yeah, I mean, look, you spent a 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick on those 2 LSU defensive tackles. I need to see something. And whoever is making the decisions next year needs to see something. By the way, because I don't have helmets and heels today because it's Thursday, your Liam Cohen stat of the day, he will make Brenton Strange Kate Otten next year.
There you go. Yeah, I think this is pretty similar to like cornerbacks, how I did with Trey Prince and Monteric Brown, where like you got these 2 young guys, one of whom, or both of these defensive tackles are rookies, and like it's a position of need. And so you're really going to be looking over these next 3 games to see how big really that position is going to be needed based on how these guys play over the next 3 weeks. And yeah, I wonder what Devon Hamilton's contract looks like, because I would love if he stayed in town long term. But it feels like Jefferson might be kind of like a cheaper replacement option for him. And then Mason, like obviously you want him to be the long-term replacement for Eric Armstead as like a 3-tech who can line up hypothetically a few different places, but really truly get after the pass rusher. So yeah, I think that's fair. While we're talking about the position, Jaguars Nationwide asked, do you two think the possible new regime would convince Eric to play his natural defensive tackle spot next year? I believe dead cap prevents release or trading him. Yeah, he's definitely going to be on the roster next year.
Yes.
Yeah, you think he's
the answer is yes. It's not that hard. Like he's getting paid. He's a team player. He recognizes clearly because of his self-incited apology to Jaguar fans for liking Azeez Al-Shair's post. Like he clearly knows that people are not too happy and his play has not reflected who he is as a player this season. So yes, I don't think it would be that hard of a conversation.
Well, Lloyd corrected me. Lloyd Brooks said the mesh play was actually on Antonio Johnson. Lloyd was playing the robber. Okay. So I stand corrected. It wasn't Lloyd's fault, but still watch out for Devin Lloyd, especially against Brock Bowers this week. Watch out for Jordan Jefferson, Mason Smith. I guess watch out to see if Jeremiah Ledbetter can do another backflip. But Mia, before we get out of here, do you want to give a score prediction? What's the scoregami going to be this week?
The scoregami this week, Gus Logue. I do have the Jaguars winning this game. I don't think that's the end of the world because the Raiders are already picking ahead of you, and they are obviously in the race for the number 1 overall pick. I have the Jaguars 17. The Raiders 13. The Raiders are currently 1-point favorites at MyBookie.
Yeah. Oh man. I kind of want to say like 2-0, but no, I do think I agree with you. The Jags, I think, are going to win because I think that both of these teams are definitely still playing to win, and I don't think either of them are in tank mode. But I do think that the Jags are just a better team, especially with Max Crosby and Devontae Adams no longer being on the 2024 Raiders. So I'll go 13-3 Jags. It's going to be ugly. It's gonna be a good, ugly, sloppy.
I'll be there. I can't wait.
Yeah, helmets and heels. Make sure to check them out all throughout the week, but especially when they're up in Vegas. You have anything else more specific to plug?
Nope. I got to hop off to another call and use the restroom. So let's call it a day because the Poopy Bowl, the Toilet Bowl round 2, it comes Sunday at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas.
That's right. We will be back on Sunday after that game to break down everything we saw. As Mia said, we will not be back during the week next week because of Christmas, but we'll be back. Pretty much look out for us on Sundays after the Jags game, and we'll be back like New Year's Eve-ish. So till then, Appreciate everyone. Thought this was a fun conversation. Watch the Jags, but especially Brian Thomas Jr. Take care, everyone.